Hi, I'm Sarah D.
I'm Dr. D.
This is conversation number 107, and we talk about economics here. And yes, it's like a gun. And we talked about, last week, we talked about bonds a little bit. No, we talked about the Federal Reserve. Pardon me, I'm getting ahead of myself. We learned how the Federal Reserve works, how it tries to keep the value of the dollar as stable, right in the middle as possible, and to keep employment as high as possible. And we got this routine down. And that it's not a willy-nilly choice. They actually have something that's very rational behind it. It's like they understand the economy because they're economists and they're also people who have worked in banking, so they understand the way money works. Somebody recently said, and I heard about it, and I asked Dr. D about it because, of course, I didn't understand what the difference was. Venezuela, oh, we're just going to be like Venezuela. You better start stockpiling this and this and this and this. Watch out, watch out, watch out. Oh, no, danger, Will Robinson, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that.
Lost in space.
Lost in space a long time ago. So why do we not need to worry about being like Venezuela? What is the difference? What is the same?
So there are two things that Venezuela does or did. One, they changed the way that they deal with property rights. That is, they took away a lot of property rights. And when you don't have property rights, you lose your incentive to participate in the economy completely.
Do you know why they did that?
They thought it would be fairer. There were people that didn't have enough property, and there were people who had too much property. So
they knew better.
So if you take the property away from the people that have too much property and give it to the people who don't have enough property, then the economy will be fairer.
But did they give it to those people, or did they just take control?
They just took it for the government, and then the government said that it was of the people and for the people.
That's terrible.
So
we haven't done that here.
No, we haven't done that here. So that's a big problem, right? So you take factories away from people that own factories and know how to work the factories.
Ooh, and then know how exactly to make them efficient.
So you got two things going on there, and you take them away, and then you put some government bureaucrat in charge, but probably not a bureaucrat, probably friend of the president. Because it's fairer for it to be the friend of the president than for it to be not the friend of the... I don't know. It's a concept of fairness I don't understand well, but that's okay. And so you take it away so that the people own it as opposed to a person owning it. And it turns out that remember we got that discussion about when's the last time you swept a bridge?
Yes.
Okay, so that's the deal, right? So now your factory is owned by... The factory that you work for is owned by the government. So when's the last time you swept the floor in a factory that was essentially a bridge?
And are you paying for it? Like we pay for the bridge?
Well, of course you're paying for it. The government bought it somehow, right? The government owns it. So it was paid for somehow, right? But nobody has an incentive to work the way that they work in a private economy. Let's just say that. You don't have as much incentive. Because you're not going to starve to death because the government's going to promise you a loaf of bread.
So it reminds me of something I saw a long time ago where people were talking to students and they were saying to the students, well, listen, we want to make things fair. And so what we're going to do is they were talking to people who, they were 4.0 students. And they said, we want to make things fair because there's some of your classmates who are getting C's and D's. And so in order to make it fair, we're going to take your A and average it so you all get like a C.
Yeah.
And the A students were not happy about it, but the C's and D students were very happy about it. And
the D and F students were particularly happy about it.
Yes, but the funny thing, or the ironic thing, is the students who were getting the A's, when they talked about it with regard to, well, there are some people who don't have enough money or who don't have all the things that other people have, so we should give things to them so that they'll have it.
We should take it away from the rich and give to
the
Robin Hood.
Mm-hmm.
Robin Hood's a good deal as long as you're not the rich person.
Right, and so
whatever rich it is, whether it's rich in grades,
right,
or rich in money, or rich in land, or rich in
and what
ability.
I'm losing it, Dean. I'm losing
Sorry.
it. Don't do that. Stop. So they were the A students were okay with doing it with stuff. They thought, yeah, well, that's fair. We have to be fair.
Because they were poor and stuff.
And then, yes, because they were poor and stuff, because they were students, because they were just beginning. And so they thought, oh, yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah, great idea.
But then when they brought it to the medium, the market, the tangible stuff that meant something to them was the grades, they went, no, that wouldn't be fair.
It's no fair take rate, yeah.
But it's just because they said, well, but we worked for our grades. And then the person doing the interview said, well...
Some people say they work for their money.
Yeah, they sacrificed, and they put it in savings instead of buying the Porsche. They drove the broken down, rusted out clunker, and they lived in a cinder block, little cockroach infested place because they had to build the ability to be able to survive. And if you're just spending everything and you expect them to just give it to you so you can continue to spend,
need to talk about wealth generation at some point in time. But this isn't the one.
How did we get here?
You took us there.
You're welcome.
Yes, and
it was fun.
It sounds like a great thing to talk about, but we're not going to talk about it today.
I appreciate it.
You're welcome. And so that one thing was they decided to make things fair in the economy.
Yeah.
And making things fair in the economy actually makes it inefficient. That is, it reduces the ability of the economy to produce because something that's owned by everyone is taken care of by no one.
Yeah.
It's a problem,
Yeah.
right? Common area in a dorm is not well taken care of unless, of course, you're paying somebody to take care of it, in which case it's no longer common because you've got somebody who's paid to take care of it, right? So that's those are the problems you run into. So that was one thing they did, but the second thing they did was, now there's less stuff being made, so it's harder to buy stuff because there's less stuff being made.
We're talking about Venezuela.
Venezuela
We're
still,
back there.
right? So
Good. Thank you.
not enough stuff being made. And so you go, well, if there's not enough stuff being made, there's an easy way to solve that problem, right? You're not getting enough stuff. How do I allow you to buy more stuff?
Well, I would say I just need more money.
You need more money, and you and I would say that all along. So let's think about this again. We're back to our $20 bill, and we had this story where I was a wheat farmer, and she was a chicken farmer, and we had a dairy, and I would trade wheat for eggs, but she didn't like wheat, so I couldn't get eggs. And she would trade eggs for cream because she liked cream. And I had to figure out some way to get eggs. And so we played this game, and then we determined that if we had this thing called currency, I could give her $20 and she'd give me $20 worth of eggs.
Absolutely.
Right? And then
Because I
she'd take
could
that
take
$20
cream.
and give it to the dairy for cream. And then the dairy farmer would give it to me for wheat.
I mean, I could have taken your wheat and then used it, but I didn't want to.
Right. And so we just had this $20 going
And
around.
Maybe they didn't want wheat
right?
either, but
And
they would want this.
Yes. And so it just circulated through. That's all it did was circulate through. And so I made a certain amount of grain, she made a certain amount of eggs, and the dairy farmer made a certain amount of dairy. If the government dropped in another $20 and gave me $20, I now have $40. I still only want $20 worth of eggs. And you still only want $20 worth of... And he still wants $20.
Or something else.
But you don't have extra money, but I do.
Oh. Why did they...
All that happens is pretty soon, this extra money is still chasing the same amount of goods.
Unless maybe they saved that money?
It doesn't matter. This money is chasing the same amount of goods. And so now what happens is what used to be $20 worth of eggs now costs $40. Because there's $40 to buy it with.
That kind of makes sense, but kind of doesn't. But...
Yeah, I know.
Okay.
And so And so all we did was change the amount of bills in the economy. Nothing changed in the economy.
Because people weren't able to make more because they don't have more chickens.
You don't have more chickens, I don't have more land, and the farmer doesn't have more cows. So all of a sudden, all we're doing is moving this $40 around.
So that has something to do with what you said last week with regard to the
So what happened to the value of...
price of houses?
Or let's just talk about the price of eggs. They went from $20 to...
Yes, but did the government make that happen, right?
Somebody did it by printing up the money.
Yeah. So that's how they kind of keep it even.
Right.
If there's too many goods, then If there's too many goods, then they lower the amount of money.
No,
in
if
it?
there's too many goods, they add more money in so that the
Add
price
more
of goods doesn't go down. And if there's not enough goods, no, let's change that. If there's too many goods, they add money in so that the price of goods. And if there's too few goods, they subtract money out.
So they try to keep the dollar level that
So
way.
the dollar always buys the same amount. That's the goal.
That's what the Federal Reserve does.
That's
and
what it
that's
does.
why it's different than
Right.
than
That's
than
exactly
the
what they do. They decide how many 20s to print, how many 20s need to exist in order to just do the exchange, which is what the currency is supposed to do, is exchange. So in Venezuela, the president of Venezuela decided, well, we're not making stuff. What we need to do is make more money. So they printed up more money and gave people money. Turns out right at the beginning, you're really happy when the government gives you more money.
Yeah.
The problem is that a year in, it's a real problem.
Because there's just stuff gets depleted because people can't make more stuff. And besides, when you take away their incentive to make stuff, they're really not making stuff.
And so what happens to prices? I
Go
printed up more
way
money, there's
high.
less stuff, your prices go way high. Hyperinflation. That's where it comes from. It comes from those beautiful activities.
It comes from not having a Federal Reserve that knows what they're doing.
Yes, that's
And
exactly
ours
what
does.
That's exactly. Or one that has a political agenda that has nothing to do with stable money.
The way the market actually
The way it actually works, right? The way they have some if you have some view that money is something other than just a process of exchanging.
Right.
And that if the Federal Reserve or the government decides that the store of value is no longer important as
To keep it even.
and keep it even, right in the middle where the heart
Middle,
is.
Where the heart is. That's right.
Exactly.
That's how you know it's good.
Keep in the middle where the heart is. Right. Okay, so that's the problem with Venezuela and hyperinflation. Now, we haven't done away with property rights, so we don't have that problem. So we don't have to worry about that problem. But what did the government do during COVID?
They printed up a lot of. They gave us checks.
They sent us a lot of money.
They sent stimulus checks to almost everybody.
Yeah. And now the question is,
point.
where did the money come from?
Well, they were checks.
They were checks. So we were given checks. And now the deal is the Federal Reserve has a magic checkbook.
So that's where it came from? It's not really.
The Treasury doesn't have that same checkbook.
So the Treasury is not monetary policy, it's
Fiscal
fiscal
policy.
So,
Well, it's technically the Congress, but it's paid for through the Treasury.
which is not the Federal Reserve.
No.
Okay. So they wrote these checks up, but how did they have money for those checks?
Yeah, how did we have money for our house? We bought this house,
We
and we
borrowed
didn't
it.
have the money for it.
No, we smiled real pretty.
We smiled pretty. And they said, oh, we'll just give you the house.
Filled out a lot of papers.
And we did fill out a lot of paper for the bank.
and
what did the
showed
bank
them-
do?
Showed them that we could.
They were
actually make the
trustworthy.
payments on the loan that we were getting from
Yeah.
the bank, and the loan money came from people who save money.
Yeah, that's right. So the bank gave us money, but the bank didn't just have money. The bank that the money had came from somebody's savings, right?
Right.
Somebody saved money. So if the government borrows the money, right?
We borrowed the money.
If the government, right? So we borrowed money for our house.
Oh, and the government borrowed money for the checks.
The government borrowed money for the checks. So if the government borrows money for the checks,
And they borrowed it from people who buy bonds,
yes,
people who save.
people who save.
So if you buy government bonds, or if you're companies, because mostly it's companies and institutions that buy those big government
So we've got
bonds.
these $40 and they're circulating in the
Right.
economy. Yes. Institutions buy those bonds mostly.
And so
Banks.
Can I finish my thought?
Yes.
And so that they buy the bonds, and then the people who are saving buy the bonds, and the government's able to write the check on the bonds, and then the people who have the bonds or the institutions, as they pay,
They get paid back
they
eventually.
get, yeah, because they have the bond that's worth so much money, and then eventually that money comes back to them because they saved it. But in the meantime, we were able to use it.
Right. So let's
So
think
it's not
about
like we
this.
borrowed it from them.
Let's say that we need $40 to have the prices where we want them to be. So we need these $40.
Okay.
And when I get the $40, I put 20 of it in savings,
Yeah.
right? Now there's only $20,
Can't get as much stuff.
right?
So I have to
now there's
buy-
only $20 that I can get stuff with. But this money in savings doesn't stay in savings.
No, I could actually end up borrowing it.
You could borrow it, right? So I buy $20 worth of stuff,
Yeah.
and the government buys $20 worth of stuff
Because you borrowed something.
because the government borrowed it. I put it in savings. The government borrowed it. And so there's still $40 we're going through the economy. So nothing's happened to the number of dollars. It's just who's spending it.
Does somebody understand this better than I do? I kind of understand it. I hope you do. I understand it, kind of. But it's going real fast for me.
Right.
That's okay.
So if the government borrows the money, all of the money that it's spending that it doesn't have,
Writing checks for.
for the money it's writing checks for. So if it wrote bonds and borrowed all of the money, it did write bonds and borrowed all of money for the stimulus checks that it wrote, as long as those bonds are purchased in the private sector, then it's just circulating through and it has no effect on the number of dollars in the money supply.
Why?
Because we had $40, I saved 20, I gave you 20, the government gave you 20 when they bought some stuff from you.
And so they didn't make money.
They didn't make
They
money.
didn't make money out of.
They spent money they didn't have.
So they borrowed it, but
They didn't print it.
they didn't print it. The Federal Reserve kind of does that, but they also can just take it back out, and that's called easing or something.
Well, one's easing and one's tightening.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the bonds, the government borrows the money to do its excess spending. If it doesn't borrow the money to do its excess spending, how else would it do excess spending? What's the other thing the government can do to get money?
I don't know. I'm kind of lost.
How does the government get money? It borrows money, but what's the other way it gets money?
Provide services. I don't know.
It doesn't sell services.
It's
April 15th, we're gonna be really pissed at the government.
Taxes.
So it could just take the money from you and give it back, right? This way, what it's doing is it's taking from savers and giving it to everybody.
Who are willingly buying
giving
them.
it up, right? Willingly saving it, willingly giving it up.
Because they're going to get.
They're going to get
interest.
something back in the
They're
future.
going to get more back than they
paid in. Yeah, it's a beautiful
And
thing.
that's what savings is.
Yeah, that's what savings is. You get
Oh,
more back in
man.
the future. So
Oh,
there we go.
man.
So this $40 is just circulating through the economy and nothing has happened to the money supply, provided all of those bonds are bought by private people. Private banks,
So that's a caveat.
individuals, yeah.
And it was. Oh, stop. Who else was it bought by?
So there was somebody else who could buy the bonds.
Other countries?
Well, other countries could buy them, and that's fine because now we're just borrowing money from other countries, which is great.
Because they're
That's savings, right? That's savings that way, yeah.
Okay.
It doesn't matter, right?
Okay. So
We-
okay. Who else?
Who else buys bonds?
The Federal Reserve?
There we go. If the Federal Reserve bought those bonds, they use their magic checkbook.
Oh, that's right. We talked about that too.
So if the Federal Reserve buys those bonds, all of the bonds bought by the Federal Reserve are bought on the magic checkbook. And those bonds, that money spent, the bonds bought by the Federal Reserve generates an increase in the money supply. So if the government sells 2 bonds and one of them is bought by the Federal Reserve, then money has been created.
So next time, if anybody comments on this and says, "Would you do like a graph and like do a like a bulletin board and show these things visually?" Maybe not a graph, but maybe pictures of things like that. I know that would be useful for me, but it's okay. I can talk to him off camera. But if it would be useful for you, please comment, because
So government spending isn't necessarily inflationary. Unless, of course, the Federal Reserve creates the money the government's spending.
okay.
Now we've got a problem. Or a potential problem.
So it makes so much sense to you.
Unless, of course, you're a modern macro theorist. Modern monetary theory. New things happen then.
Okay.
Magic. We don't have to talk about that today.
So I'm really glad because I'm lost on that yellow brick road.
Yeah.
Or the two roads diverged or something.
As long as I'm saving the money that the government is spending, there's no new money. It's only when the Federal Reserve buys one of those bonds with a new 20. Now there's 3 of them, and what used to cost $40 will now cost $60.
So there you have it. Clear as however clear it is for you. Do you have anything more?
No, I'm happy.
I know.
This was so much fun.
Okay, well, you know what? That's going to wrap up our economic conversation for today. I don't even know how to even attempt to put it in a capsule. Would you do that?
I would say that fiscal policy is not necessarily going to cause inflation.
And fiscal policy is the government.
Is government spending.
Just depends on how it's done. And in
How it's
Venezuela,
done.
the way they did it caused it.
Yeah, because they just printed up extra money and passed it around.
And they didn't worry about its effect and the fact that people who were making stuff actually had no incentive or very
It's
little incentive.
very
to make stuff.
oversimplified, but it's a beautiful story.
It's a good story. We
It's a
like
good story.
stories. Well, we'd like to thank you for joining us and hope that this either clarified or at least gave you some questions to think about that might make you consider not to be worried that we're going into hyperinflation and,
And next month, the Federal Reserve is going to start shredding money.
there we go.
So if you're worried about inflation,
That will help. Not have inflation.
yeah, they're going to shred some money.
Okay. So, thank you for joining us. I'm Sarah D.
Dr. D. Namaste.
Make it a great day.